One of the few guarantees in college football is that fans can never make up their mind. One game they have the best quarterback in the world and the best coach in the world, and the next day they have the worst coach and the worst quarterback in the world. They want the guy fired, they want the guy benched, and they want the guy sent to the sun. That happens with every fan base every single year, and a couple days ago, I was thinking to myself, who are the most scrutinized players over the last few years in college football? A few came to mind, but today I want to focus on one particular player from Tennessee. He was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, showed flash of being great, but ultimately was underwhelming, was run out of Tennessee, and was probably the most scrutinized Tennessee quarterback of the last couple of decades. His name was Jarrett Guarantano. In today's video, we're going to talk about him. We're going to go through why he was one of the top high school quarterback recruits in the country, his up and down Tennessee career, what happened to him after Tennessee, and why he never lived up to the hype. But before we get started, if you're a big college football fan, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you're to support today's video, and let me know what player I should cover in my next one. Now let's get started and talk about what happened to Jarrett Guarantano. In order to understand what went wrong for Jarrett Guarantano, we first need to go back in time. JG was always a big deal as he first got his rise in middle school, more specifically in 8th grade. At the time, he had dreams of playing big-time college football and was just your normal middle school quarterback. He was soon to be a freshman and was going to head to the prestigious Bergen Catholic High School. That school is located in New Jersey and has produced a plethora of big-time players. Guarantano ended up being the next in line, and his life would change in just an instant. He was the talk of the town after Rutgers decided to give him an offer in 8th grade. He had just camped there a couple weeks ago, and the Scarlet Knights came away super impressed and thought this guy was the next big thing. With one offer already in hand, eventually he got even more. Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Boston College also started to show interest, and now JG was put into a vulnerable spot. Yes, he was getting the hype and fame that he probably wanted, but it's a double-edged sword. With all the young hype comes a lot of responsibility and the chance that you could go down as a bust or a super scrutinized player. Except all of this really wasn't that much of an accident. His dad James was a wide receiver at Rutgers from 1989 to 1992, and he ranked 6th all-time in career receptions and 8th in receiving yards. He would translate this to his son Jarrett and would help him get connected in the recruiting world. Jarrett grew up a Rutgers fan, and his dad always helped him out. His high school coach said, quote, "I think first of all his dad was a great player and had been through a lot of it. JG has kind of been groomed for much of his high school career, and he knew what he was getting into." As a freshman in high school, Jarrett began to blow up and received over 30 scholarship offers in just the next few months. He was at Bergen Catholic High School and was considered a must-have recruit for pretty much every college in the country. He played the most important position of quarterback and eventually narrowed things down to a couple of big-time programs. He said, quote, "I've narrowed it down to Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. Each school gave him the best of both worlds. He was a high-profile guy and played some big-time games. In one big game in particular, he showed his potential. Against IMG quarterback Shea Patterson, Guarantano threw for 378 yards and had 5 total touchdowns. He was just 1 yard short of the school record, and with him outdueling Shea, Jarrett was now getting even more hype. In total as a junior, he threw for over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns, and also ran for over 9 touchdowns. Unfortunately though, his season was cut short due to a broken throwing wrist. That's why the numbers were low. When it came time to pick a school, it seems like some of those blue bloods would back off of him though. He ended up choosing Tennessee over Rutgers and Ohio State, and his commitment would come in the form of him walking through Times Square. It was pretty nifty at the time, but while Tennessee is definitely a prestigious and high-profile program, what happened to his big four of Clemson, Bama, Ohio State, and Oklahoma? That's what some people were wondering, and his way of getting to Tennessee was unique. Ohio State at the time had taken a commitment from Tristan Wallace, and Austin Kendall had flipped from Tennessee to Oklahoma. This allowed JG to have that spot, but at the end of the day, Rutgers kind of got screwed. There was nothing stopping him from becoming a Scarlet Knight, and with his dad and his fandom, this was a tough blow to him. He said it wasn't easy, but he felt it was the right move. He said, quote, "When I was a young kid, I always dreamed of going to Rutgers. Rutgers was the only place I ever really thought about, and sitting here feeling that Rutgers wasn't the place I decided, it wears on me, but I think it was the right decision." Why did he end up going to Tennessee? Well, he said, quote, "I think Tennessee is a 40-year plan, and I know that Coach Butch is always going to be there for me. My family was very comfortable there, and I think about SEC football. What's better than that?" At the time of his commitment, Jarrett Guarantano was receiving a ton of hype, and Tennessee fans were pumped for him. He knew at the time that he would sit behind Josh Dobbs, but he was going to develop and break out into the superstar many thought he could be after Dobbs left. Chad Simons from Scout.com said, quote, "Jarrett's one of the top quarterbacks in the country. He has a live arm, can buy time outside the pocket, and absolutely loves to compete." Despite seemingly falling off a little bit, he settled in as a pretty big deal according to 24/7 Sports. According to them, he was the #1 dual threat quarterback and the 78th best player in the class of 2016. JG was a huge deal, and Tennessee fans were ready to embrace him with open arms and for him to be the next great Volunteers quarterback. Except, it would not go according to plan for Guarantano. Just like Tennessee promised, Guarantano would sit behind Dobbs in 2016 and would be thrusted into a quarterback battle going into 2017. When he arrived, he said, quote, "There's nothing I want more than being the starting quarterback at Tennessee." Butch Jones decided that neither had won the job, and that both him and Quentin Dormady would get an opportunity to compete. Both would be the co-starters, and the 2017 season would sort that quarterback battle out. It went back and forth between Dormady and Guarantano, but by the end of the year, JG seemingly was the guy. He almost led them to a win over Kentucky, helped them beat Southern Miss, and started against both LSU and Vanderbilt. While Jarrett appeared in 10 games, Tennessee's play wasn't great, and neither was Jarrett's. He finished with 997 yards with 4 touchdowns and 2 picks. At the end of the season, Butch Jones was fired, and Jeremy Pruitt would come in. He noticed all the talent that Jarrett had and decided to make him the starting quarterback. Quentin Dormady left for Houston, and JG would finally become the guy in 2018. That season was very mixed. In the first 5 games, he failed to pass for over 200 yards or get more than 2 touchdowns. He had led them to a 2-3 record and lost to all 3 Power 5 teams on his slate. Except in mid-October, Jarrett showed the potential that Tennessee fans had been waiting on. He threw for 328 yards and 2 touchdowns in a road victory over the number 21 Auburn Tigers. This was a huge win. From there, he'd struggled at Alabama and also lost to South Carolina. He really wasn't playing all that well, but he did throw 2 touchdowns in an upset win over number 11 Kentucky and finished the season as the starting quarterback. In total, he threw for 1,907 yards with 12 touchdowns and 3 picks. Those were extremely underwhelming numbers, but to give him some slack, it was both him and his coach's first year at starting. So, the expectation was going to rise in 2019. Except 2019 was a really weird year. He'd end up splitting time with Brian Maurer as the starter, and Tennessee had a disastrous start. They lost both Georgia State and BYU at home, and Jeremy Pruitt's seat was hot. Eventually though, Jarrett would figure it out and help them finish the season strong. Despite breaking his wrist, he threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win over South Carolina, helped them beat UAB, went on the road and beat Kentucky, threw for over 400 yards in a win over Mizzou, and then knocked off Vanderbilt. Despite starting out 2-5, Jarrett had now led them to a 7-5 regular season record, and they'd be matched up with Indiana in the Gator Bowl. In that game, he threw for over 200 yards, and despite 2 costly interceptions, they still walked away with a 1-point win. Jarrett was truly a weird case. He really was not putting up great numbers, but he was helping Tennessee win games, and he just led them to an 8-win season. He was by far the most polarizing quarterback in the SEC that year, but everyone was just waiting for him to actually break out. That was the issue. All the potential was there, but he had just not shown it. In total, he had thrown for 2,100 yards with 16 touchdowns and 8 picks. Going into 2020, Tennessee would end up having a lot of hype, and he'd actually start the season out pretty strong. In week 1 against South Carolina, he threw for 259 yards with 2 total touchdowns. The same thing happened against Mizzou, as he combined for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in that one. Jarrett was off to a 2-0 start and had 5 touchdowns in just 2 games. Except unfortunately, things would completely fall apart from there. He would struggle majorly in a loss to Georgia, got torn apart by a really bad Kentucky team, got blown out by Alabama, lost to Arkansas, and also lost to Auburn. Guarantano had led them to 5 straight losses, and Tennessee was in absolute shambles. They even gave Harrison Bailey a start, and now the Tennessee fanbase had completely turned on him. Despite having nearly 3.5 years of starting experience, Jarrett Guarantano only had 1 or 2 real good games. No longer was this game managing being enough, and fans were tired of it. Tennessee wanted to see success, Guarantano was just not living up to it. It was time to give Harrison Bailey a turn, and it was time for them to move on from him. The amount of scrutiny and hate that Jarrett Guarantano got in that 2020 season was unbelievable. I remember even making a video about it. The Tennessee fan base that welcomed him with open arms had now turned on him. But could you really blame him? Guarantano could never put it together, he struggled with turnovers, he didn't have great stats, and he was just a game manager. Both sides eventually decided to part ways, as new head coach Josh Heupel brought in Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton, and Guarantano would decide to go across the country and play at Washington State. In total at Tennessee, he played in 41 games and had 32 starts. He threw for 6,174 yards with 38 touchdowns. He had 3 games of over 300 yards and ranked 7th in Tennessee history in passing yards, 6th in passing touchdowns, and 7th in completions. On paper, it looks like Guarantano was a good quarterback, but unfortunately, he had 3.5 years to start, and that's why those numbers were so good. JG had been a disappointment, unfortunately, and was now hoping to revitalize his career at Washington State. He'd end up being the quarterback that Nick Rolovic brought in, and he would compete with Jaden DeLaura for the starting job. Luckily for him, because of his experience and his potential, he was named the starting quarterback going into their matchup with Utah State. Sadly though, JG's Washington State time did not go according to plan, just like at Tennessee, and if anything, it was even more heartbreaking. Against Utah State, he went 8 of 13 for 56 yards. He suffered an injury in the second quarter and was ruled out for the remainder of the game. From there, DeLaura would take over, and JG would not see time again until late September. In their road matchup against Utah, Guarantano would throw for 248 yards with 1 touchdown and 3 picks. Little did he know that would be the last game of his college football career, and he ended his time at Wazoo with 1 touchdown and 3 picks in just over 6 quarters of play. In total, JG had been named the starting quarterback going into 4 different seasons and had now spent time at 2 different schools. While statistically he is one of the better quarterbacks in Tennessee history, he's also one of those quarterbacks that is one of the biggest what-ifs in school history. As I've said many times already, he could just never really put it together, and anytime he would show flash, he would follow it up with disappointment. You could blame it on a multitude of factors. At the time, Tennessee's coaching situation was a complete mess, and I also don't think he was just ever that ready. At Wazoo, that injury did not help, and there was just something that was always off. Despite all that though, Guarantano would actually get a chance in the NFL, as he went undrafted in 2022, but picked up an opportunity with multiple teams. He was first picked up by the Arizona Cardinals, and actually got an opportunity to play preseason football with them. He played every single game in the preseason, but was cut before the 2022 season started, and was eventually stashed on the practice squad. At the end of the 2022 season, he was given a tryout with the Denver Broncos, and was brought onto their practice squad. He was actually even promoted to their active roster on December 20th, but he never got his opportunity. Eventually, he played preseason football again and was waived. So in 2016, Guarantano entered college football with all the hype in the world. He was the next big thing and started on and off for the next 4 years. He never quite put it all together, but despite that, still put up good overall career stats. He's considered a huge what-if by Tennessee, and unfortunately never made it work at Wazoo. What's crazy though, is that he did end up in the NFL. That is where every big-time quarterback wants to be, and Jarrett Guarantano was on an active roster for an NFL team. That is actually quite impressive, and at the end of the day, well, he will go down as a disappointment, and that's what happened to the most scrutinized quarterback in Tennessee football history. But what do you guys think? If you're a Tennessee or a Wazoo fan, what went wrong for Jarrett Guarantano? What do you think of his story and what happened to him? And what player should I cover in my next one? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about what happened to Nick Montana. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.